Now, there's a big open question of alternative clients and blueprints. Okay. So there are some people want to do Rust client. Saw on Twitter there's some people that want to do TypeScript, and that's great and fine. But the issue is, what is the canonical Cardano? Okay. So what is Cardano? Well, major innovation that's occurring right now with the SIP 1694 work, the Conway era that's being pushed out with SanchoNet, is that we actually wrote the specifications for these not in a prose like LaTeX, but actually in Agda. 6 years of research has gone into how to do this, and a lot of software has been written to build a workflow for this. The power of Agda is that it's implementation agnostic. What that means is that you have blueprints that you can do code extraction from, and you can use that to test and certify. And that's why there's this idea of an Agna class, because how to do that is a very specialized skill. It doesn't necessarily require a huge amount of time, and it doesn't necessarily require like a PhD, but you just kind of have to learn it. And we have a model that we've developed over 6 years that is IP of the Cardano ecosystem. It's something we've all learned together. We've open sourced it, and it's a unique thing we've brought to the table. This is the heart and soul of how you can safely move to a polyglot ecosystem. When you have alternative clients, you call that polyglot. Basically, it means many languages. So we want to have lots of alternative clients, but we want those clients to conform to standards and quality so that regardless of the client that you choose, you have reasonably the same level of a quality assurance that you have from the canonical Haskell client that we're currently using. What this also means is that you can ensure that certain properties, like the upgradability of these clients, so that hard fork combinator, for example, that gives very easy hard forks, is preserved throughout the entire system. So when people, the government of Cardano says upgrade, actually happens, as opposed to a developer over here on Rust or TypeScript or the Haskell side holding the network hostage and not adhering to the will of the Cardano government. So this is another big project to get all of Cardano covered with formal specifications. We have one level of spec. So this is kind of the Agda. And over here is kind of the LaTeX world. So overall, we have math blueprints that are implementation agnostic, but this is the particularly useful representation. And one of the things we're going to be doing throughout 2024 as part of the GCD agenda is getting end-to-end coverage of all of the prior work, so that there's one set of universal blueprints, and then creating an entire certification pipeline so that third-party clients can certify against it, and then all the users get a guarantee that the clients are interoperable with each other. Big house of work. There'll be a specialized working group at Intersect to facilitate this, and the formal methods tribe will work very closely with them and gradually work their way through. It's also an opportunity to simplify some of the blueprints of Cardano because, for example, there's been a lot of conversations about retiring some or all of the logic in Byron to massively simplify the design and reduce the complexity of the code, which would mean there's a much faster time to market for the Rust and TypeScript clients. And there shouldn't be any consequences to the users of Cardano because those are legacy concerns. So these are all some of the conversations. So there's a blueprint conversation. There's a certification conversation so that we can have many things. There's a lot of ongoing concerns there. And throughout the next months, things will start moving over, but we'll continue together working on that. There's a credentialing conversation that's happening right now. There's an education conversation that's occurring here. And then there's also a product management conversation of where should we go with Cardano. We have a continuity and GCD backlog that we put together as a suggestion. And as it moves over to the members based organization, then there's a debate and discussion amongst all the members, and that becomes a universal backlog. And that universal backlog can be ratified by the government of Cardano, which would be 1694 if ratified. So this is kind of a high level summary of a very, very complicated thing. Effectively, you're changing pilots in a fighter jet. It's moving very fast, and you're having to do some very complicated maneuvers. But we're moving to an incredibly decentralized working group. And what's so cool about Intersect is that it's made, operate, and run by you, the community. So what we can do is build buckets and institutions and fill them with some ideas and some capital to bootstrap and get it started. But ultimately, this is the organization the community uses to interface with things like the code, many different processes. And also, it's a thing that can become a custodian of knowledge, like things required to certify open source developers and other things. Now, this process can grow and evolve over time because we only have one client, it's Haskell and Agda. But, if there's a Rust client, then you can add a Rust course. If you take that, then you get access to the Rust repos, assuming you know how to read the specs and the best practices and understand Cardano. And of course, these courses will change over time because every year the protocols evolve and get more advanced and have different designs, and people have to stay up to date, just like doctors have to stay up to date, or other professionals like lawyers have to stay up to date. There's some notion of continuing education that occurs, and you either prove it by practice or prove it by certification or both. So this is the current thinking that's in execution. There's a whole team here to transition the repos. There's a whole team on the other side to receive them. There's a huge backlog effort to get everything bow tied up. And there's already a governance and operating system for that backlog, and they're executing through a PI system on a quarterly basis. So this is all in flight. The fighter jet's in the air. And then over here is where the pilots change out. We're not going anywhere. No engineers are being pulled. No leadership is being pulled. We're just now adding a force multiplication. So it's going from one set of people to another set of people, and those things are basically growing up. The goal is to give the government of Cardano some options. Let me change this over real quickly. Let's use a different color. How about purple? Not sure why that's. There we go. There we go. We want to give some options to the government. Okay, so buckets to fund. And then you have execution vehicles. Okay. And the basic idea is that you allow them to run for a transition period. And then what the government will do is look at these things and the accountability, the speed, the strategy, the resources required. And then they can vote on whether they want to continue that or vote if they want to pivot that significantly. The other thing is this allows a tremendous amount of diversity at the client level. So you can have very different philosophies and people, but it preserves and protects the kinds of things that ensure that Cardano continues to have uptime. It's been up for over 2,100 plus days. So you need a SIP process, a proper change management system. You need a universal backlog that there's a consensus around. You need to understand that the people who are doing the work adhere to a certain level of quality, but you need that to be open and follow best practices of an open source project. And you need a pretty good operating model so that we can consistently continue to get upgrades. One of the things that would be quite tragic is during this transition, it goes to Intersect, bureaucracy creates a reality where things slow down considerably. The way things are structured right now is they've actually been speeding up quarter by quarter, and there's been more reliability that's been coming in quarter by quarter. And things are, even though we're doing more complicated things, there's being delivered in a reasonable time window. I don't want to lose that. as an ecosystem. I think we need to continue moving quickly, but we do need to be moving with many voices because there are a lot of different opinions about things that should be priorities. And sometimes those are contradictory or divergent opinions. And it's very important to have working groups where those opinions can come together, have a discussion, and get all these things done. And then, of course, there needs to be a way of creating legitimacy for those opinions, not the trust me, bro, but a vote. And that's really the point of 1694. It's to have a deliberative body that's endowed with the power of the ADA holders through a series of checks and balances to review and understand, and in some cases, provide funding to buckets or to give consent to execution vehicles to do something. You run the system. Its idea is minimum viable governance. We call it MVG. And you run it for a little while, some period of time, time T. And that can be 6 months, that can be a year. And you look at the results and you ask some basic questions. Are we getting more decentralized? Are we still at the same level of quality, security, and reliability? Do we feel that more voices are being included in the conversation? Is Cardano as a platform getting more competitive? Are we gaining users? Are we gaining utility? Are we able to do new and more interesting things than we were doing before? These are some baseline questions that the legislative arm, the government of Cardano, is going to be asking.